Hi everyone, Rudy here. I want to make a little video talking about the recent blog post by the three developers. It came out earlier this night and it was quite an interesting read, and they give a little bit of their philosophy on balancing, set design and Paragon levels, and I felt this was a good opportunity to also give my own input about these points and also put things a little bit into perspective. So in case you haven't read it yet, there's a link in the description, but I'll also go over it and talk about the main points. So just to give you a better understanding of where we're at. But first of all, I also want to mention that I'm quite happy that the dev team is doing this. I think it's great that they're communicating, that they're giving insights, and just in general, I feel like they are much more in touch with the game and the community than they've been in the past. Just looking at the recent history. And I think this is great, even though most resources are going to be focused on Diablo 4, obviously. I think it's good that we're still getting updates, that we are having developers that are actively working on the game, trying to make the best of what we have until the new game launches. So anyway, the first big point here is the Paragon and greater levels, and they talk about how their design goal for any build is a greater than 130 solo at around Paragon 5000. This is excluding seasonal buffs. So Paragon 5000 is quite high, obviously, and there's only a very small minority of players that has reached this, excluding myself. I'm also just 3000 something in non-season. And especially people that play solo are usually very low Paragon compared to people that play the meta and form in groups and so on, because there's a vast difference in the XP gained. And also, like, people that used to play a lot in the past will be much lower than people playing the same amount of time more recently in the game's history, simply because of the ongoing buffs that we have seen over the seasons. So people make a lot more experience these days than they did back in even a year ago. So to put things a little bit into perspective, I've prepared 3 D3 planner setups here, and I just imported my character from this season, and I didn't really change anything about the roles or the build. This is obviously a torment setup, so this is not a pushing setup, but it doesn't really change the overall scaling mechanisms and the point I'm trying to make. So it's Paragon 2455, and then we have the same build, just with higher Paragon 3500 and then 5000. And I wanted to see the difference in the damage and the toughness values, which is the main thing that's going to change at higher Paragon values, because every point of every Paragon level will give you 5 points of main stat after Paragon 800, which is something that is very, very easy to reach these days, and gives you a significant power boost for your character at higher levels. So I calculate these values here. And I cut like the last few numbers, so I only took like the first 4 numbers to make it easier to comprehend. So you see the damage value is 3,200 here, which is 3.2 million here, and so on. But it's more about the relative difference. So my character with just 1,000 more Paragons would already gain around 29% more damage and 19% more toughness. So a greater rift tier increases the monster HP by 17% and the monster damage by 2.33% roughly. And this means that just in raw damage I would gain around 1.5 tiers worth of damage. So with area damage scaling and with the stricken mechanic making it easier to kill bosses, the longer the fights last, you actually gain more than 1.5 tiers from 29% damage increase. It's more like 2 tiers, probably even 2.5 tiers worth of power level increase, just in raw damage basically. But not only that, but you also gain a significant difference in toughness, and this is something that people often overlook. I think the toughness gains is actually really important, and this is even more pronounced when you look at the Paragon 5000 values, where the increase over my current character would be 70% DPS, which is around 4 tiers almost in raw damage, and 47% toughness. So I almost gain like half the toughness extra. This is basically like when you use your build that you have right now and equip a level 100 esoteric gem. So imagine this, and this is what you gain for free, just having more Paragon. And this is really a significant boost, because it makes builds a lot easier to play, a lot tankier, and generally allows people to go even more offensive, or generally have, basically you can beat the higher tiers playing worse than, at lower Paragon, basically beating lower tiers at lower Paragon. So the game becomes progressively easier to play, and it's not just a numbers change as many people suggest. And it's actually making the game easier. Even if you have to beat the same relative monster health, let's say you go 40 as higher with 70% more damage, and it's still making your character so tanky that effectively you don't have to dodge many mechanics, or you can simply be much more sloppy in your gameplay and still survive the same as someone in much lower. And it's also, making it so that people that are less experienced at the game also die very easily, especially at season start, when they're low Paragon, when they have, terrible item rolls. They get their 6-piece set, and they get, catapulted into greater with 100, 110, 120, easily, simply because, once they get all the items together for the build, the damage is already there to simply one-shot everything at these tiers. But the toughness is going to be significantly lower. You have to see that this is, already an optimized character at a high Paragon, and not a Paragon, 600. Basically, when you have terrible gear, this value will probably be only like 1/3 of this, or even less. So the big difference really in gearing up and in Paragon leveling up is the toughness. That gives you so much more offense than just the raw damage values. But obviously this is a problem as well, I think, and this is something that should be addressed. But in general, this is a little bit of a sidetracking talk here, but I wanted to get this point out and draw some attention to it. So let's go back to the post. This was a pretty long detail about Paragons, but maybe this gave you like a little bit of a better impression of how it scales, and also what that means for the class and set balance. So simply put, some builds gonna have like a little bit better Paragon scaling than others, and it always depends a little bit. And I think that the Paragon 5000 scaling goal is like balancing goal is a little bit too high. They should balance for lower Paragons, and then just have some builds become super tanky and easy to play at higher Paragons. Most people don't really care, because non-season is non-season, and season is where most people play and where most people care about the results. Anyway, we have also like a little point here about how close they want to make these different builds and different classes to be. So they say like 1 or 2 greater levels plus minus is fine, and generally I agree. But also again they say like this is subject to fishing and a high player skill cap. And I agree. I think that the difference can be much bigger though. We see this on certain classes especially, or in certain seasons where a certain build that is very difficult to play is the meta. We see this, for example, in season 5, 6, 7 with Demon Hunters, when it was the Fan of Nice Legacy Nightmare builds that had a very high skill cap, and very few people actually reached its full potential. So this is simply something that they need to keep in mind, and also that you need to keep in mind as a player when choosing what build to play at the start of the season, or what build to push. And also just looking at the leaderboards, you have to be aware of how difficult build is to play and also to gear. And for example, this Legacy of Nightmare Fan of Nice build, this was very difficult to play and very difficult to gear. And obviously there were huge differences in the greater with clears. And then there's also certain builds that rely on fishing much more than others. These are also generally those builds that deal a lot of damage to big monster packs, but are terrible at killing off elites or killing the Rift Guardian. And also those builds that are very immobile. So there are certain builds that really can't use a mobility skill, or are just generally not really good at making pulls, because they slow down enemies, they stun enemies, or they simply can't really risk moving around too much. So these are also builds that benefit a lot from having these gold tier rifts, and they could potentially scale to infinity. There's something like what we're seeing this season again is the Death Nova for Necromancer, which is an incredibly strong skill, and it works very well in season 19 because the season theme is there to finish off all the elites and the Rift Guardian, and otherwise the build doesn't really work because it's so strong on AoE but it's so weak at everything else. This is like an extreme example of this. And obviously in the future seasons, when this current season theme is gone, then Necromancer is going to be harder time again with Death Nova. But there might be other builds. But this is just like a very prominent example of exactly this mechanic in action. Yeah. Then also they talked about the greater than 150 cap. Generally, I'm fine with the greater than 150 cap, but I agree that this season has become very silly, in Foreman especially, with the 150 being the highest cap. So previously you were always pushing for the higher tiers. At least in the solo clears, this was still going on, even though 150 has been very accessible in Foreman for a while now. And I think this makes pushing a lot more boring. So personally, I've pushed at least a temporary rank 1 in Foreman with Rax on NA, playing a supporting hunter. There's actually a video on my channel. And we made like a 4-minute time, I don't know exactly anymore, but it was a very good clear, and at that time it was rank 1. And now the clears have gone down to 2.5 minutes or something, which is still quite impressive, but in the end, these runs are so short, and simply you fish for like the absolute perfect storm. You have to go in, you have this wizard playing Star Pact, and basically you have 3 meteors or 4 meteors, then you need to spawn the boss and the angels kill the boss. So this is the whole extent of gameplay right now. So if there's 1 meteor that doesn't do enough progress, or something goes wrong, you just instantly restart the game, on top of all the fishing that you have to do to even get a good rift in the first place. So I think this is really bad, and obviously with the incoming nerf to Bazooka Wizard, this problem will be a little bit alleviated, and also with a very likely weaker seasonal theme, everything will help to make 150 not as much of a joke as it is now. And I think that's good. I think we don't necessarily have to increase the cap. I think it's fine if Foreman clears, revolve around the faster time, but it shouldn't be something like 2 minutes. If it's something like, 6, 7, 8 minutes, rank 1 clears at the end of the season, I think something like this is okay. And in solo, they should really try to avoid giving anyone the possibility to clear 150, in my opinion. Even though it's a nice goal to reach a cap and so on, I think that, at the top of the leaderboard, it's much more exciting to see someone, push the next tier, something that is, that comes out of nowhere, and not, everyone just, trying to get, a minute faster than the other guy on the same tier. I think that's not very fun. And there's probably a lot of people agreeing with this. And, I see that, there might be technical difficulties with increasing the cap. And in a perfect world, it would be probably the best way to keep going is to just increase the cap, because then you'd keep this excitement going of, reaching the highest tiers. But if this is not feasible, then just try to, keep us away from 150, I guess, is the way to go. So we'll see how this plays out. Obviously, there's still going to be very accessible 150 clears in Foreman, even after they killed the Bazooka Wizard. We've been clearing 150s for a long time now. It started with Witch Doctor, I believe, with Spirit Barrage, and that build has only gotten stronger since then as well. So, this is still a fallback option, basically. But, even Star-Packed Wizard without the Archon and so on is probably going to clear 150 without too much trouble. So it's still going to be there. But as I said, it shouldn't be as ridiculous as it is now. So it's good that we're stepping back a little bit. I would definitely expect big nerfs, and potentially I would also see them go a little bit further. So I think that actually actively reducing the tiers we're running would be a good idea to make this this goal of chasing the 150 clear again very exciting. I think that's something that's missing, especially in Foreman. And there could be a lot of ways. They could nerf builds, they could nerf supports, they could just change Greater Rift a little bit. For example, changing Conduit. Conduit is very strong right now. I think Conduit is too strong, and at high tiers at least, especially in Foreman. And they could increase the progress needed to clear Greater Rift, so that you have to kill more monsters to spawn a Rift Guardian. This would inevitably lead to lower tiers being cleared, and also like the builds probably changing slightly and the meta changing to like more aggressive running through the rifts, running through the maps, having more mobile builds, and generally more engaging playstyles, I would say, because it's more fun to to go through like 2 or 3 or 4 tier maps of Greater Rift instead of just opening the Festering Woods and trying to get a 100% floor and spawn Rift Guardian all on the first floor and just having this perfect rift. I think something that Season 19 has shown and done very well, with all the critique of the season theme being very overpowered and so on, what it has done really is make Greater Rift pushing a lot more exciting after the first floor. So what I mean is that usually when you try to push for a high rank, you put in keys until you open a Festering Woods map or Battlefields of Eternity map, or maybe a Silver Spire, and then you hope it's a good one with good monster type. So for my Crusader, usually that means like half of the monster types are really bad. Then there's like maybe 1/3 that is like okay, and then there's like like a small portion that is really, really good. And you try to get for some of the really good stuff, or at least the okay stuff. And then you also have the RNG of what elites you get, what elite monster types, if you get the Conduit, if you get the power, and so on. So obviously lots of layers of RNG. And this season has really shown that a rift can be exciting until the very last moment. Even if things go wrong, even if you get a really bad follow-up level on floor 2, on floor 3, there was always the possibility to still, do the seasonal theme, get a really nice meteor shower at 400 stacks, spawn the angels, and let the angels kill the boss, until the last very moment. And I think this was very exciting. So pushing in Season 19 was one of the most exciting seasons to push in my opinion, simply because, you could still play through a rift that you started and always have a chance of beating it. Even at the very highest tiers of, I've cleared 150, and I was playing through so many, mediocre rifts, and I always felt like I had a chance, and this was great. And I think this needs to come back, and we haven't really had this for a very, very long time. Basically it goes back until Season 1 and Season 2 and Season 3 when we still had trials, because the trial forced you to use the keys that you got. So every key was valuable. And these days you just farm 100 keys an hour, and then you do this for an afternoon, and you're good to go to push for hours on end. Even if you restart a rift over and over, you get keys so easily, you can just retry, and it's worthless. A key is literally worthless. So you just open 50 in a row until you get a good map, and then you play this. And then after 5 minutes you realize, oh, floor 2 is really bad, let's leave. And Season 19, because of the seasonal theme, giving you the option to kill elites, to kill a Rift Guardian in a short amount of time, it was great. Obviously it was really overpowered, and I wouldn't recommend doing something as as ridiculous, as insane as this again, but it gave us, at least it gave me a very fun time pushing. And I think this is something that Blizzard should be aware of in the future. So, it should be easier to kill elites. It should be easier to kill Rift Guardians at the high tiers. They could reduce the scaling a bit. They could give us, more options in our builds themselves, have more options, something like multi-shot with the rockets, being very effective against 3 targets. We need more stuff like this that makes it worth fighting elites. I think something like reducing HP barriers on elites would be a good idea as well, so that they more often, die at relatively the same time as the trash, or, shortly after you invest a lot of time. So that could be compensated by reducing the progress from progression globes a little bit, and not make it too easy to simply kill elites and get lots of progress. But they could balance it out a little bit, and I think this would make the game much more exciting in general. Okay, so the last part about this blog is talking about creative game mechanics and animations. So this basically goes on about bazooka wizards and the mostly Heaven's Fury Crusader with the stutter stepping. I think it's a very good change that they removed the stutter stepping, but I hope they will limit it to mainly the Crusader Heaven's Fury, because that behaves in such a weird way that it actually increases your DPS if your animation cancel properly. This was also the change that I suggested all along. I think it's great they're doing this. So basically, what you could do is you could cast Heaven's Fury faster than intended, and removing this will put Crusader just in line with most other builds, and it will also make it more playable. Obviously, it will lower the skill ceiling a lot, and this is fine in my opinion, because there might be new Crusader builds coming up anyway. Or maybe they haven't really planned anything for Crusader because they just got an update, but in the future there might be something else. And now it's another class's turn. We will see. We'll probably get the PTR patch notes anyway very soon, and I'm already excited for that. And then Bazooka Wizard, obviously they could have prevented this all along by just stating just before the season started that Bazooka Wizard would be not allowed to be played, because it's simply not humanly possible to play the build really. And literally every single wizard that you play or that you see, everyone is using a macro, which is generally not allowed. And I'm also not really a fan of it, but the damage was already done after this patch was out, and people start playing it. They can't just ban thousands of people. So there was one more season now of macro gameplay for wizards, and now it's gonna get nuked, and I think that's a good thing. And I hope that Blizzard will be aware of the situation and try to avoid it again in the future. That making macros so good, or so necessary, in fact, in case of this build, that you can't really do without. So this is something that they need to be more careful about, in my opinion. Also, very spammy builds where you have one button that you press, 100 times a minute or something. Something like, Archon builds that you have to press 1 all the time. Giving something like this, some actual relevant damage value or some kind of effect, but having it on like a 10-second cooldown, I think it will be perfectly fine. Not having these skills that you just press, 100 times a second. The same goes for support monk mantra, for example, which a lot of people use with macro, simply because you have to spam it as much as possible, and you have like almost infinite resource. So it's like ding, 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 ding. I think it's pretty stupid design, no offense, but I think that this is not the way a game should be played, and this is something that should be avoided. And also there's like one more point somewhere in there. When you talk about CDPS, this is here, CDPS playstyles, they say that they don't really try to encourage it, and there's been like a lot of internal debate about whether this should be a thing or not, and they don't really want to give more of these CDPS playstyles or support playstyles. I think this is probably the wrong move. It's good to have these CDPS play styles because it allows people at lower Paragon to actually play in groups and feel useful. So this is great. And some people simply enjoy playing support. Let them have it. And the big problem really is that there's a lot of that is lacking class variety. So generally supports are in almost all cases a monk if you need a toughness, or a barb if you need a pulling, or in foreman you have both. And there's not really any place for any other support class unless you run a triple support setup. But even then, we have seen this season being one support monk and two support barbs, because the pulling potential of a support barb is so strong that it actually trumped all other possible support setups, including Demon Hunter or Witch Doctor, that give crazy damage buffs, but not really so much in terms of like pulling ability. And I think it would be better to balance out these classes a little bit more. For example, giving a Demon Hunter or giving a Witch Doctor some way of pulling monsters a little bit better. Just a wild example, like a wild idea, could be something, having like a legendary item that makes Entangling Shot act a little bit like the Crusader Horse that binds enemies to you so you can drag them along, just something like that. I think this would be some kind of idea that they could explore, and that would make support playstyles a little bit more varied, and not always the same two classes. I think this would be great. Yeah, and also like one more point is here about the group versus solo play. They try to reward group play, and well, I think they're over rewarding group play a lot. So a big concern for many people is that group play is giving away too much experience. Generally, foreman meta is several times or even an order of magnitude faster XP gains than efficient solo play, and I think that's a really big issue. Like the gap is really too large, and it could be closed a little bit. Simply because there's no way that even by changing by reducing the gap by like 50%, there's no way that solo play would become better than foreman play. So foreman play is always more efficient in bounties and rifts. You have loot sharing, you have you can spread out in T16 rifts to clear the map faster. In foreman greater rifts, it's simply way easier to go higher tiers, and way more consistent. You can play way more maps usually than someone trying to get up there in solo. So yeah, they should probably change the group scaling a little bit, or maybe also change the builds to make those builds matter that don't scale that well in group, simply to have the gap be a little bit smaller between like the tiers being cleared in foreman and the tiers being cleared in solo. So one more thing that could also do with the current sets that we have is to redesign them a little bit, especially those that are really outdated and not really used anymore. As Natalya build comes to mind, for example. This is something that has been mainly used for its 6-piece bonus to buff other skills, and not really as a Rain of Vengeance build per se. And I think that's quite sad. And they could obviously bring it back, by buffing something like the Crushing Rain build, and have the focus be on Rain of Vengeance a little bit again. But I think they could also be a little bit more radical with the changes to these very underused builds, because I think there's very low chance that anyone is really gonna suffer from it if they redesign it a little bit, and for example keep the 6-piece bonus it is, to keep all the other builds intact, or mainly intact. So something like the N6 M4 build, or Natalya Fan of Knives build, Natalya Rapid Fire build, like all these builds mainly use Natalya simply for the 6-piece damage buff to other skills, but not to Rain of Vengeance itself. So what they could do is change the 4-piece bonus to have a higher value that buffs Rain of Vengeance, and the 2-piece maybe have the playstyle not be as spammy as it is right now, but make the 2-piece just like a 1 second reduction in the cooldown instead of 4 seconds every time you hit something, and then, you know, buff the 4 piece by a lot to compensate. So, you know, I think this would be something where they could, you know, play around with simply changing numbers, and they could already, you know, make new builds out of that, or at least like repurpose the set to be used in new ways. And you know, there's probably like many other examples where you know, something like this would be possible, to just, you know, shift the focus from, you know, one part of the set a little bit to another part, and make it more exciting that way, and open up, you know, more build possibilities to play at the end game. Anyway, this was it for this video. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed the, you know, like the way I presented this. Let me know what you think, and yeah, we'll see what they have in store for the PTR, which should probably be coming out this week. I will probably play it. The next couple of days I'm relatively busy, so it might be in the weekend where I really try it out, but I definitely will be there, and I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching.